All right, so let's get started. Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the studio. We are going to talk about the equipment in the studio first. Then we will talk about all the people who work in here. Does that make sense? So that is our structure for the lecture today. Stuff, equipment first, then people. Television studios are designed to do two things. Television studios are designed to do two things, and thus everything that follows is based off of these two things. TV studios are designed to control light, and they are designed to control sound. They are designed to control light, and they are designed to control sound. Now, generally speaking, when you just take a look at this television studio, this TV studio is about 30 feet by 40 feet, okay? And the ceiling height's probably just north of 20 feet, maybe a little, right around 20 feet. This TV studio is what I would consider an average TV studio, okay? But TV studios get bigger than this, and there are also TV studios that are much smaller than this. Does that make sense? So a small TV studio, especially in a place where real estate costs a lot of money, like say New York City, don't be surprised. You know, the NBC Nightly News is shot in a studio that's probably about half this size, and in fact it's shot in this direction, sort of a bowling alley type of a shot. Does that make sense? So the set would be down in that location and the cameras would be way back here, and so it's a much more narrow type of a deal. But do you think real estate in New York City costs a little bit of money? Yeah, okay, so when you're in the cities, don't be surprised. The studios might be very, very, very small, and that's part of it. Studios get bigger than this. Sports Center over at ESPN is in a studio that's probably twice as big as this. Twice as big as this. But the Sports Center studio also has a number of subsets located within it. So they have the main desk, but then they have smaller areas off to the side where they'll do interviews or other sorts of special programming. Yeah?
Can having a bigger or smaller studio enhance or make your viewing worse or better?
Does it make it better or worse? Well, it should be a good fit between what you're doing. In other words, the size of the studio should complement what it is that you're trying to do. So if you had a very, very, very small setup in a very, very, very large studio, you would have more difficulty controlling light and sound. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so, you know, it needs to be a good fit. It's sort of like a person who lives in a mansion, right? One person living in, say, a 10,000 square foot house. It's not a good fit. Does that make sense?
So it's just like unnecessary space.
Yeah. Yeah, and it winds up becoming more of a hindrance, actually, in some cases. Now, when studios get really, really, really big, we don't call them studios anymore. We call them sound stages. We call them sound stages. And so if you were ever out in Hollywood or West Hollywood and you're doing tours of you know, the film lots and whatnot, that's what you would see are sound stages. And sound stages are simply warehouses. They're just ginormous buildings where quite involved sets can be built, and they can be very, very big. But that's what we call them. We don't call them studios anymore. We call them sound stages. Does that make sense? Now, live programming, a lot of live programming, both off the West Coast and out in New York City, is shot in old theaters. So anytime that you need to have a studio audience, you need to have a place to put that audience. So if you're dealing with something like a game show or a talk show like Oprah or something like The Price is Right or whatever, you're going to need something like that. So don't be surprised. Those are shot in old theaters. that have been adapted to contain the television production equipment. Do you follow that idea? But this is sort of an average size for a studio. So the studio is constructed to control light and sound. Let's think about the floor. Take a look at the floor. The floor is designed to be very, very smooth and very, very flat. Why? Why does the floor need to be smooth and flat? Well, it does make things easier to move around, but well, no, it's not the audio. It's not really the lighting either. It's the cameras. Oh, that's what you meant? I'm sorry. The cameras. It's the cameras. It's all about when you have a camera that's live, and that camera is doing a tracking shot, okay, it needs to be smooth as glass. Does that make sense? Because it simply cannot be bumpy at all, especially in high definition television, right? Where you're dealing with quite large viewing monitors. How many of you have TVs at home that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Yeah, well, you're going to notice every little single bump. Does that make sense? And so, the floor has to be kept very, very, very clean, and the floor has to be kept nice and smooth. Now here at Eastern we have a challenge. This is also a classroom, right? And so you guys are constantly tracking in dirt, salt, mud, etc. And so it tears up the floor pretty badly. But don't be surprised when you go into a normal TV studio that's not a classroom. You would expect to see the floor very flat, very smooth, and clean. Do you see how there's bits of tape on the floor? Occasionally you see the bits of tape. Those are called spikes. Those are called spikes. And spiking the floor is okay, all right? But you wouldn't want to overdo it, because what are you doing? You're making little speed bumps, right? They're little speed bumps. And so the next thing you know, you're doing your tracking shot, and it's Taylor Swift and her BFFs, and you're doing this tracking shot, and you hit a tape spike, and it goes ta-dunk. Does that make sense? And then when you take a tape spike up off the floor, make sure you clean the sticky stuff off the floor, because over time what's going to happen? Dust, dirt sticks to it, and you've got another speed bump. Makes sense? So believe it or not, the manner in which you care for the floor will be noticed. It will be noticed. So let's say you get that internship at ESPN, you get an internship at a nice studio someplace, they're going to watch how you treat the floor. Believe it or not. It's a part of the whole deal. All right? Now, that's sort of enough about the floor. Oh, just so you know, how many of you have worked in theater? Anybody do a play in high school or college or community theater or something? It's very, very common to spike a stage so that the actors and actresses know where to go. Does that make sense? I'm supposed to stand here, turn like this, and sing my song. And they're standing on a spike. So spiking a stage is very, very common. Spiking a studio floor, we spike it, we use it, we take it away, we clean off the goo. All right? As you go out to the walls, you'll go, well, Dr. Utterback, it's just a cinder block wall. I mean, that's not rocket science. It's a cinder block wall. And yes, it's just normal construction techniques. Whether it's concrete, brick, or cinder block or something like that, you're going to have walls. But in many studios, what you will see, instead of actually being able to see the cinder blocks like you can here, many studios, more modern studios that have made the investment, what you're going to see is that there is a fabric covering that has been attached to the wall, all right? It's been attached to the wall. That fabric covering is acoustic material. It's acoustic material. designed to help absorb audio and prevent audio reflection, which is what we call echo. Does that make sense? Now, that fabric membrane is, not only is it an expensive thing to put up, but if you accidentally tear it, what happens to the acoustic property? Is it lost? Yeah, you're going to lose the acoustic property. So if you're in a studio and you see a fabric covering on the wall, be very, very careful with it. Don't lean on it. Don't lean a ladder against it. Don't bump a camera into it, because if you tear it, you're defeating the purpose for this stupid thing. All right? Make sense? Sort of, kind of? Occasionally what you'll see is that in less expensive installations, you know, they might take egg crate foam and glue it to the wall or something like that. That's not the best way to do it, but it's one way to do it, just to try to deaden out the sound. Make sense? We don't want echo. We don't want echo. As we come away from the wall, you'll notice the big giant curtains. We have big giant curtains in the studio, big giant curtains. Big giant curtains have a name. They are called cycloramas. Cycloramas. C-Y-C-L-O-R-A-M-A. Cycloramas. Cycloramas. The big giant curtains are called cycloramas. All right? We call them Cycs for short. We call them Cycs for short. And what they do for us, they actually have a couple of different purposes. The cycloramas help absorb sound, and they help to prevent sound reflection, and so they are going to help to prevent echo. Does that make sense? They help to deaden the space. They help to deaden out the space. Cycloramas, if you really take a look at this blue one over here, you'll notice that is that glossy, or is that more of a matte finish? Is it sort of brushed out? Yeah, it's more brushed out. So in fact, they will help to prevent reflection, light reflection. In some sense, they do reflect light, but they do it in a very gentle way and in a diffused way. So they are non-reflective, and they help to absorb light as well. Does that make sense? Because you don't want light reflecting all over the studio, because eventually what will happen is it'll reflect back into the camera lens and mess up the video, right? Now, cycloramas also have another purpose. Essentially, it's a set piece. It's a set piece. It provides a background. It provides a neutral, dead background to start from when you're building out a set. Does that make sense? So in some ways, it's kind of like a blank canvas. It's our blank canvas that we start from as we build out a television set. Do you follow that idea? Yes, no, blank? Here at Eastern, we have really 3 Cycs that are workable. We have the large blue one. There's a black one that's over there behind the blue one. It's a very, very small one. But over here we have a Cyc, which is really kind of interesting. Take a look at this thing. And I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but here, check this out. Look at that Cyc. Ew! Who invented that color? Does anybody know what that thing is? It's a green screen. It's a green screen. What's it used for? What's for graphics, sorta. For what? For backgrounds. All right, so let me tell you what this thing is. First off, that nasty color is called Chroma Key green. That nasty color there is Chroma Key green. Chroma Key green. Chroma Key green. Chroma is spelled C-H-R-O-M-A. Chroma. Chroma Key green. It's a highly saturated green, all right? There's also Chroma Key blue. Have any of you ever seen Chroma Key blue, like in the making of a movie, like how they do Star Wars or something like that? Oftentimes they use that. It's the same. It's blue, but it's that same sort of nasty, oversaturated blue. All right. Well, what that thing is a Chroma Key cyc. It's a Chroma Key cyc. All right. That's really what it is officially. It's a Chroma Key cyc. Chroma Key cyc. Yeah, a blue screen is a Chroma Key cyc. Chroma Key cyc. All right. And it's a soft cyc because it's made out of fabric. If it was made out of wood or other types of paneling, it would be called a hard cyc. Does that make sense? But it's a Chroma Key cyc. It's a Chroma Key cyc. So that particular color green is a very specific frequency. That color green is a very specific frequency. And by using the machines in the control room, I can isolate that frequency and remove it from the video image and replace it with anything that I want. Does that make sense? So, if I have a camera that's looking at Chroma Key green cyc, okay, the camera is going to be looking at, let's say it's looking at me and it's looking at that nasty color green. Well, it's going to take the color green away and I'm still going to be here. Does that make sense? And then I can put anything I want where the green was, right? And most of the time, what is that? Where do you see this effect done most often? Weather forecasts. Yeah, it's the meteorologist, right? It's usually at about 16, 17 minutes past the hour. Boom, there's the weather, right? And the guys or gals are standing in front of a weather map. Well, the weather map is coming from a graphics computer. And the graphics computer output is the weather map in video form, and it is being put in place of the green. It's not covering the green, all right? It's not really covering the green. The green is being removed, and the map is being put in its place, and all of a sudden it looks like what? I'm standing in front of the United States, right? But if you were in the studio, what would you actually see? You'd actually see me standing in front of the green. So, quick question, how does the meteorologist know where to put their hand? Because if they turn around, they're just going to see green. What? Monitors, that's right. There are monitors that show the meteorologist what they look like in relationship to the Chroma Key effect. In other words, it's a backfeed. It's coming out of the control room. The effect is done in the control room. It's sent back out here. And the meteorologist, usually there's one there, there's one there, and there's one there. And so oftentimes what you'll see them do, they're talking to you about something. Yeah, you know, the weather today was really hot and blah, blah, blah. But I really want to talk about something that happened out in California today. And you'll see them sort of take a step back. They bring their hand up. They look down at the monitor there. It happens really fast. And they position their hand. So up here in the, and then they'll come back to the camera. So up here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a cold front pushing in. Does that make sense? Or they're going to come back over here and talk about something in the Midwest. Watch. They're going to take a step. They look at the camera. They always turn. They never turn this way. You know, they always turn outward. They'll turn like this. They'll put their hand up. They'll glance down at the monitor. They'll position their hand. They'll come back to the camera. But it all happens very, very, very quickly. The next time you're watching the weather forecast, turn the volume off and really watch. And watch where their eyes are going. Watch their eyes. And you'll see them. They're up here, they're up here, they're down there. They move their hand, they come back. You'll see it. Make sense? And sometimes they have a little remote control in their hand. Yeah? What do you think that's doing? That's to change the picture. That's it. So what they've created is essentially a slideshow of graphics. How many of you have made a slideshow of graphics? Anybody ever make a PowerPoint presentation in your life? But you hit the space bar instead, right? Well, it's the same stupid thing. It's a slideshow that's being controlled with a little clicker, right? Question?
Sometimes like draw circles around like an area.
How do they do that? That's done actually with an active interface with the graphics computer. So oftentimes they'll have a tablet with a pen, and they can actually do this and draw. Just like, how many of you, you're watching a football game and they go back to the commentators and there's a shot of the field or something and they're circling these guys and circling those guys and drawing arrows and whatnot. Yeah, that's all it is a tablet, a lot like an iPad, all right? And they have a pen and they can actually draw live on top of the picture, but it's a layer, and anytime you have a video layer, it's called a key. We'll get into that later, all right? Questions so far? We've got Cycs. We've got the Chroma Key Cyc. Yes, no, blank. Making sense? You know what the Chroma Key Cyc is for? All right. I don't know how many of you have been out buying fabric lately. Do you think Cycs are expensive? Yeah. Fabric, especially large panels of fabric, is extraordinarily expensive. And so, do you think you can just take those down and wash them? No, you can't. So you have to be very careful with the Cycs. You don't want to get them dirty because you simply cannot wash them. What? Can you steam them? You can try. You can try. And so sometimes steaming a wrinkle out will work. So if you get a wrinkle, maybe you can steam it out. But you can't wash them, all right? Here's the other thing though, guys. Think about it. What happens if you tear it? Let's say you lean a ladder against it or you bump the camera into it and it gets a little tear. Well, you stitch it up, right? You know, you're going to stitch up the little tear. In high definition television, do you think that's going to be like painfully obvious? Yeah, so listen, as a production technician, the manner in which you handle the Cycs is important. You handle them by the edges, if you need to pull them or push on them. You handle them by the edges. You need to be very gentle. You don't want to knock anything into them. You don't want to lean anything against them. Now here at Eastern, our Cycs are actually repurposed theater curtains. All right, so we have a rope and pulley system. You don't have to touch the Cycs. You can just use the rope and pulley system to move them around. Cycs do have a fixed lifetime. You put them up, you use them, they start to dry rot, and then you throw them away. And you buy new ones. Yeah?
So, like, you see how that one is right there, like that color difference?
Yeah.
Does that mess you up in any way?
No, because the camera shot's above it.
Oh, okay.
You don't see that. And that's a stain from when the roof leaked. That's a stain from when the roof leaked many years ago. And there it is. And there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing. But luckily, if you think about the camera shot, is that going to be in the shot? No. It's out of the shot. Yeah.
How long is the typical shelf life for the Cyc?
How long will it last? These we've pushed a long time. I mean, these are probably on the order of easy 20 years old. I would guess that you might get about 15 to 20 out of them before you have to replace them. This building's about to get renovated, and we're getting a brand new setup. And so we'll have a brand new triple track Cyc, which will be really nice. So these old nasty things will go away and we'll get some new ones. Any other questions about the Cycs? Yeah?
Do you ever have any issues with color fading from light exposure or anything like that?
Not really. Not really. you'd be surprised because at home, right, you know, when you have fabric that sits in the sunshine, you know, have you ever seen that? Like a couch that has been, the color of the fabric has changed, right? Do you know what causes that? Think about it. UV, right? Are these giving off UV in the same way that the sun does? No. Fascinating. All right, let's go up to the ceiling, and I know that the lights are on, but let's go up to the ceiling and talk about what's going on up there. The entire thing above your head is called the lighting grid. The entire thing above your head is called the lighting grid. The lighting grid is made up of pipes called battens. The lighting grid is made up of pipes called battens. B-A-T-T-E-N-S. B-A-T-T-E-N-S. The lighting grid is made up of pipes called battens. Now, ideally, the installation of the battens is in both directions every 3 feet. All right, but if you take a good look up here, what you're going to see here at Eastern is that our grid is not a true grid. Our grid is simply a parallel type of a thing. All right, but what you would see in a newer installation is you would see battens every 3 feet, almost wall to wall. Every 3 feet this way, and every 3 feet this way. Wall to wall. Does that make sense? A true grid. A true grid.
What do you mean every 3 feet?
Every 3 feet. So imagine, see the pipe I'm standing under right now? The batten? I'm standing under a pipe. All right? The next one would be there, and the next one 3 feet, and the next one 3 feet, and the next one 3 feet, and so on, and they would go in both directions. So this way and that way. All right, that gives you the most options in terms of lighting placement. All right. Now, the other thing you'll notice when you take a look up there at the lighting grid is you'll notice a bunch of numbered circuits. A bunch of numbered circuits. Do you see them up there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on. Numbered circuits. The numbered circuits have pigtails that are hanging down. Those are your outlets where you plug in your lights. Each circuit is 20 amps. Each circuit is 20 amps. And that is pretty darn standard in the industry. All right. Is that each circuit can handle 20 amps. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that each circuit can only handle so many watts before the circuit's going to get overloaded and you're going to throw the breaker. How many of you have ever blown a breaker at the house? Right? You turn on the air conditioning or something, or you turn on a hairdryer or a vacuum cleaner or something else that uses a lot of electricity, and the next thing you know, oh dang, dang. Then you got to go down to the basement and find the stupid thing and turn it back on. Right, well, it's the same thing here. If you overload a circuit, the breaker's going to pop. So let me give you a rule of thumb. 20 amps, 2,000 watts. 20 amps, 2,000 watts. That's the safe running load. That's your safe running load. So if it was 10 amps, bingo, you got it. If it was 30 amps, 40, making sense? All right, so 20 amps, 2,000 watts, that's your safe working load. Now the actual is like 2,400 and some odd watts, but don't push it. And you can sort of just forget that I told you that. All right? Just follow that rule of thumb. One time we were doing a shoot inside of a high school, and I overloaded the circuits, and the one entire wing of the high school, oops, Has it happened in the recent past? Does anybody remember a Super Bowl in the recent past where the whole half the stupid stadium went oops. Oops, sorry. Can you imagine the guy trying to go find the circuit breakers? Oh no! It's the Super Bowl, it's live, right? Ah! Get the lights back on. Okay, now, up in the grid still, everything that's hanging off the grid is essentially called a lighting instrument. Anything that's hanging off the grid is essentially called a lighting instrument. Lighting instrument. So the lighting grid is made up of pipes called battens. We have numbered circuits. We have numbered circuits with pigtail outlets, right? Each circuit's 20 amps. And then we have a bunch of lighting instruments. Lighting instruments come in two classifications. Lighting instruments come in two basic classifications. You have spotlights and you have floodlights. Spotlights and floodlights. So every lighting instrument that you run into, every single one, can be put in one of those categories. Does that make sense? All right. And so if we take a look around here, and I know it's a little tough because the lights are on, but let's pick out a spotlight. Do you see these? They're silver with blue trim on them, and they have the black flaps on the front. Do you see those? And some of them are small, some of them are a little big. The big red ones are the same shape. Do you see the big red ones? Those are spotlights, and those are called Fresnels. Fresnels. F-R-E-S-N-E-L. Fresnels. F-R-E-S-N-E-L. A Fresnel is a type of spotlight. A Fresnel is a type of spotlight. The size of the instrument indicates wattage. The small ones are 650 watts. The next ones up are 1,000 watts, and the big red monsters are 2,000. They get bigger than that. They do get bigger than that. There are 5,000 and 10,000, and also in the film industry, especially when you're on a sound stage, I've seen them like this big around. I mean, they're huge, ginormous Fresnels, all right? But they are a type of spotlight. The black metal flaps on the front, just so you know, those are called barn doors, and those are used for shaping the light and preventing spill, okay? But barn doors are an aftermarket accessory. It's a nice thing to have, right? Because it allows you to shape the light and control spill, but it's really sort of an accessory, all right? Fresnels are used primarily for lighting up people. They're used for lighting people, but they can also be used for illuminating all kinds of things. Set pieces, props, even creating some special effects and that kind of stuff. But normally, you know, the Fresnels really are the workhorse of the studio. You're probably going to run into more Fresnels than any other type of light, all right? That's why it's so important. It's probably the one light you use the most. Okay, now, if you look up into the grid, you might see in the back here, you see these long tubular black ones? You see those? They're pointing at the cyc. Okay, those are also spotlights. Those are also spotlights. They are called ellipsoidals. They're called ellipsoidals. Kind of difficult to spell. E-L-L-I-P-S-O-I-D-A-L. Ellipsoidals. Ellipsoidals. Okay. An ellipsoidal is a type of spotlight, okay. Ellipsoidals tend to run right around 750 watts, although I bet you can find some that are smaller and some that are more, but the ones you typically run into are about 750 watts. Ellipsoidals are spotlights, but they are effects lights. They are effects lights. They're not used for illuminating people. They're really used for creating special effects. The neat thing about an ellipsoidal is that you can create all kinds of shapes with it. Circles and squares and triangles and trapezoids and slashes and whatever else you want. Okay. And then you jam some colored material in there like a gel. A gel is the colored stuff that you put in there. And you can change the color and that sort of thing. You can also put in pre-cut metal inserts that are called gobos, all right? And it might be the NBC Peacock logo or the MTV logo, or Oprah's logo is Oprah's name. It's her signature. And you can jam it into one of these ellipsoidals and then shine it on the studio floor. Does that make sense? Have you ever seen the logo like shining on the floor? Well, it's coming off of a gobo that's been jammed into an ellipsoidal. You follow that idea? All right, so ellipsoidals are not used for lighting people. They're really an effects light. Just so you know, and to get you sort of up to date on this, these are the formal identifiers. If you're working on a set and you're going really fast and people are talking informally and stuff like that, Fresnels are called cans, and ellipsoidals are called rockets. Fresnels are cans, and ellipsoidals are rockets. Sometimes people call ellipsoidals LECOs, because that was one of the companies that made them. All right, so if you ever hear someone call an ellipsoidal a LECO or a LECO light, LECO was the company that first, or was very popular with those things. It's kind of like Kleenex. Do you know what I'm talking about? You know, give me a Kleenex. So that's what's up with that. So let's move on to the floodlights. Again, we're going to have more in-depth lighting lectures later on. We have one type of floodlight here at Eastern, but it comes in 3 different flavors. All right. The floodlight that we have is called a softbox. It's called a softbox. Softbox. And anytime you see a light that's kind of in a boxy shape, anytime you run into a light that's sort of shaped like a box, guess what it is? Softbox. TV's not rocket science. All right. These right here, do these sort of have a boxy shape? Yeah, guess what? That's a softbox, but it happens to have a fluorescent light bulb in it, so we call it a fluorescent softbox. Fluorescent softbox, all right? Fluorescent softboxes, I don't know. You know, they were popular for a little while because they don't use that much electricity. They don't get hot like a halogen bulb does, but they're not very intense. And for the working distance on these things is really only about 8 to 10 feet. See, that's why you have to bring them down off the grid like that on the extension pole and essentially shove it right in the face of the talent. So I'm not a big fan of those. And as you might imagine, what's everybody replacing fluorescent with? LED. So now, you know, it's newfangled. All right, but if we look around back here, do you see this one that's made by the Ari Corporation? It says Soft 2000 on the back. That is sort of a boxy shape, right? It is so, sorta. I said sorta. Sort of a boxy shape. It's a soft box, but it has a halogen bulb in it. So it's called a halogen softbox. Super. Super. TV's tough. It's really tough. All right, now, do you see the black ones up there with the yellow arms on them? that are pointed at the cyc. Those are soft boxes. Those are soft boxes. But they have a curved reflector inside. They have a curved reflector inside that is designed to wash the light in a vertical fashion, up and down. All right, that's what that curve does. So when they're off and you get a chance to look at them, you'll see that there's a pretty good curve inside. And that's designed to create this nice even wash of light on a vertical surface. Those are soft boxes, but we call them cyc lights. We call them cyc lights because they are designed to do what? Light up the cyc lights. And since they're actually up in the sky, we call them sky cycs. If they happen to be on the ground, shining up, got a slightly different name. It's called a ground row. Same difference. You put them up there, it's a cyc light. It's a cyc light. Question? Yeah?
Is it only the spotlights that have barn doors?
Is it only the spotlights that have barn doors? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. I don't think I have ever run into, well, wait, nope. I take that back. There's a type of floodlight that's called a broad. That's a small boxy shape. It's not really a soft box. It's called a broad, and those occasionally have. Those do. But remember that barn doors are aftermarket accessories. So don't be surprised. You might run into a Fresnel that does not have them. Okay? Yeah?
What type of throw does the soft 2000s have? How far?
Those have a working distance of more like, probably 16 feet max. But you see, you can leave them kind of up there. You know, they'll throw. Halogen is intense. It goes pretty far. Fluorescent, not as intense. LED, you know, LED's kind of in the middle. But the most powerful lights are still halogen. They really are. You know, yeah.
Is that something that like a homeowner can have in just like a regular house, or is that specifically for studios?
It's really specifically for studio. You can buy halogen lights, but you would find them on the outside of your house. You know the spotlights that people have on the outside of the house? Those typically are, sometimes they're halogen. Sometimes you might have a halogen fixture in the house and you would know it because it gets really hot. They used to make these torture lamps. I don't even know if they make them anymore. They used to have a little halogen bulb in it, and then it became a big fire hazard. They were very popular with college students in the mid-1990s, late 1990s, and there were fires because people would like take a shirt and throw it over top, and the shirt would catch on fire, and if it was up next to the curtains or something, so they were kind of dangerous. I would not recommend having halogen bulbs in the house. You probably have halogen bulbs in your car. Your headlights are halogen. Make sense? Yeah. All right. So floodlights, we've got our soft boxes. Now, there are other lights out there. There are other lights out there. There are other kinds of spotlights. There's other kinds of floodlights out there. The thing that you need to do is ask the smart question. When you run into a light, you say to your senior production technician, hey, I don't know what this is. Is it a spotlight or is it a floodlight? How many watts is it? What do you use it for? Is it for lighting up people? Is it for special effects? Knowing the correct questions, that's half the battle. Does that make sense? And so if you are asking the smart questions, you're not going to get fired. They're going to say, huh, where'd you go to school? I bet you had Dr. Utterback. Just kidding. But if you just pick it up and go, I don't know what it is, you know, then they're going to be like, come on, you know. Make sense? because there's other ones out there. When you look at the textbook, you'll see there's a few pictures of some of the other ones that you might run into. But generally speaking, you got your spotlights and you have your floodlights. Any questions up to this point? Any questions up to this point? All right, what else will you find in the studio? What else will you find in the studio? Well, your cameras. You have cameras, right? So let's all turn around and look at the cameras. Yay! How many cameras are over there? 3. Yeah. The normal complement in a TV studio is 3. 3 or more. 3 or more. If you have 2 or less, I would call it high school. All right? 3 or more. 3 or more. Don't be surprised. Many studios have 4, 5 or more. Okay, especially the larger they get, like Sports Center, they're going to have more than that. But the studio camera units that you have are kind of unique, and that's what they are. They're studio cameras. They're studio cameras. The neat thing about studio cameras is that the video signal that's coming off, is very, very high quality. It's very high quality. And in some ways, it's non-format specific. In some ways, it's non-format specific. In other words, you can record it, you can record the video in just about any format you want. Do you follow me on that idea? Okay, so you're not constrained by a particular file format or tape format or something like that. That's part of why we pay the big bucks, is to get a very high quality signal, that's pretty much non-format specific. Make sense? Studio cameras, just so you know, studio cameras are like cars. They cost varying amounts depending on what they do. All right? They cost varying amounts based on what they do. Normal, middle-of-the-road cameras, like the ones that we have, these are basic Honda Civic cameras. All right? These cameras can shoot 4x3 or 16x9. These cameras can shoot 480 lines or 720 lines. These cameras cannot shoot above 720. These are Honda Civics. Honda Civics. Anybody want to take a guess how much an entire camera unit costs? And these are Honda Civics. How much for one? Take a look. Turn around. Don't look at me. 21,000. 21,000. Anybody want to go higher?
Year are we talking?
23.5.
Year Honda.
Like fairly new. These are only about 3 years old.
3.
You're looking at about 25,000. And those are Honda Civics. Now, 25,000, right? You need to be 25,000 each. So you need to be careful with them.
Put them together, you can buy a Mercedes.
You could. Now, when you walk into ESPN, depending on what studio you're in, you might be working with a camera that's somewhere north, especially when they were new, somewhere north of 150. Do you think you need to take very careful care as you work with it? Yeah. You're holding your house. Very high quality cameras that can shoot 4K, okay, which is the new standard that's coming out. Ultra high definition television. Yeah, it's big bucks. It's big bucks. You can get small camcorders that can shoot 4K that don't cost that much, but if you want non-format specific, super high quality, high res, you're talking big bucks. And just by looking at them, you can't tell. They look pretty much the same. Does that make sense? It doesn't, you know, it's not like the difference between a Honda Civic and a Ferrari where you go, that's more expensive. With television cameras, you really can't tell the difference. It could be a $25,000 unit, a $10,000 unit, or a $100,000 unit. Make sense? So treat them all as if they're Ferraris. That is my rule of thumb. Treat them all as if they're Ferraris. All right? But you got your 3 cameras, and we have a whole lecture about cameras. What else do you see in the studio? Well, you see some monitors. There's an LCD panel there. There's an LCD panel there. There's another one over in the corner there. Anytime that you see an LCD panel or a plasma screen or something laying around in the studio, it's simply a studio monitor. A studio monitor. Often it's showing a back feed out of the control room. It's showing a back feed out of the control room, such as the meteorologist in relationship to the Chroma Key effect, right? We already talked about that. Sometimes they have monitors embedded in the news desk so that they can see what's going on, so that they can watch microwave feeds or satellite feeds or pre-recorded video. Make sense? So those are just studio monitors. They may be big, they may be small. What else do you see in here? Well, you're going to have some equipment for lighting, such as the ladder. We have a rolling ladder unit. That's for accessing the grid. There's some regular ladders that are laying around. You'll also have cabinets in your studio. Oftentimes this is where your lighting, some of your lighting equipment will be located in there, some audio equipment, your microphones, extra batteries, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you'll have equipment cabinets like that. In addition, you might have, I don't know if you guys can see it over there, there's a room. Do you see it in that corner? There's a room there. That's called the scene dock. That's called the scene dock. And the scene dock is a room that contains props and set materials, things like that. Oftentimes, what makes for a really good scene dock is that it has a garage door type of a thing to the outside of the building. So that's how you can get, have you ever been watching, like, I don't know, late night television and an elephant walks across the stage? And you're like, how'd they do that? How'd they get the elephant in there? Through the scene dock. Does that make sense? They brought it in through the scene dock. Have you ever seen them with a car or somebody rides a motorcycle in? You know, through the scene dock. That's how that's done. Also, one last thing I wanted to talk about just in terms of the stuff. Not sure you can see this, but we'll give it a try. Do you see this box here? Whoa, there's a ladder. Can you see that box? There's another one in that corner. Those are called patch panels. Those are called patch panels. Those are called patch panels. Typically, you're going to find a patch panel on each wall. Not always, but you'll find a patch panel on each wall. A patch panel is a place to hook up audio and video, and it's a place for hooking up your monitors. You can hook up your microphones. You can, in some cases, actually hook up your cameras through the patch panels. And so it's a place where audio and video can go from the studio to the control room and from the control room back to the studio. So patch panels are sort of important. So if I needed to hook up a microphone, I would put the microphone on Taylor Swift and then I would plug it into the patch panel. All right, we've pretty much talked about all the stuff, I think. Is there anything that you have a question about in terms of stuff?
Assuming these are teleprompters, are they?
Yeah, a teleprompter is an aftermarket accessory that hangs off the front of the camera unit. Okay, but they are an aftermarket accessory. You buy them separate. You buy them separate, yes. Those are the prompter units. And you'll notice that a prompter unit's really pretty basic. It's an LCD panel. with a one-way mirror and a hood. So it's really pretty basic, but that's what that is. Yeah. What else? Anything else in here that you're curious about? Yeah.
What is the reason behind like the honeycomb texture?
What's the reason behind the honeycomb texture on the ceiling?
Like these lights right here.
Oh. The grid on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What that does is helps to create diffused light. All right. So if you want light that is intense, what you want is light that looks like this. The light waves, the visible electromagnetic waves are parallel and close together. That's more like a spotlight. That's intense, right? It's very intense light. It's light that will throw a great distance, okay? It's intense. So if you didn't want that, and you wanted to have more of a soft effect, what you want is for your lights to be what? Not parallel and not very close together. So it looks more like this. So if this is the source of the light, if that's the light itself, that's the object. And that doesn't go very far. The throw is short. The intensity is low, but it's going to create what? A very soft effect. And so, what do you think that's doing? It's helping to do what? Create that scatter. Does that make sense? It's helping to create the scatter. So it's kind of like a filter, in a way. Other questions about the stuff? Other questions about the stuff? All right, we still have some time left, so let's start talking about who works in here. So draw a line in your notes. Draw a line in your notes. And let's start talking about the people who work in the studio. All right, who's the first person through the door? Well, it really depends. Are you starting from scratch or do you already have a show in place? But who's coming through the door? Who works in here? Let's just come up with some ideas as opposed to who's first. Let's just talk about who's in here.
Like a host?
Yeah, they're going to be pretty later on, right? What do we need to do some things first. We need to put up a set and we need to deal with the lights, right? So, who puts up the set? What are those people called? No. Well, yeah, set designer. That's one person we need to talk about, set designer. So let's start with that, set designer. A set designer typically does not work for the TV station or even the network. Set designers are kind of like architects. They have firms. And they are hired by TV stations and they are hired by the networks to come in and do set design. Does that make sense? They're hired. So they're like consultants in a way. You know, it's just like when you hire an electrician to come to your house to put in a new circuit. Well, a TV station would hire a set designer to come in and design a set for them. But is this a person you're going to run into on a daily basis? No. Nah, not really. But a set designer is definitely a part of the process. Who else is going to be in here? Who's going to have to put up the set? Who actually assembles it? Nope. The muscle. Who's the muscle? Have you guys ever been watching a movie and actually watched the credits? Have you ever seen the identifier grip? A grip? Key grip, dolly grip? Grip. All right. Grips are responsible for assembling the set. Grips are the muscle of the studio. Grips. You follow me? grips. They're the muscle of the studio. And they will be responsible for assembling the set. Grips. The next folks through the door are going to have to turn on the lights, right? They're going to have to deal with the lighting. What do you think? Does anybody know their name? Lighting technician. No. Not lighting technician. Well, you can call them an LT if you want, but have you ever heard the identifier gaffer? Gaffer, G-A-F-F-E-R, gaffer. A gaffer, G-A-F-F-E-R. Gaffers do lights. Gaffers do lights. All right, they're responsible for hanging, aiming, and tuning the lights. Hanging, aiming, and tuning the lights. Do you think there's also a lighting designer? Yeah. So set designer, lighting designer, yes, almost exact same thing. But are you going to see a lighting designer on a daily basis? Probably not. Are you going to run into grips on a daily basis? Yeah. Are you going to run into gaffers on a daily basis? Probably. But listen, in a very small market TV station, like let's say Springfield, Massachusetts or something like that, are we really talking about the same individual? Yeah. Back when I was in the business, I would come in and I would put up the set. And then what do you think I did next? I did the lights. Do you follow me? But in a very large organization, CNN, ESPN, that might be separate teams, separate people, right? Okay, but in a small place, guess what? You're the grip, you're the gaffer, and in fact, you're the lighting designer, and you were the set designer. There, you got 4 credits right off the bat, okay? Who else works in here? Cameraman. You sexist pig. Camera operators. Camera operators. Camera operators. Studio camera operators. Studio camera operators, many facilities still use people. ESPN, for example, still would prefer to have an actual human being behind the camera. Some facilities and installations are using robotic units, which are joystick controlled, and so really you only need one person who's using the interface to control all 3 or 4 or 5 cameras just with one interface, and it's all joystick and software controlled. So don't be surprised if you walk into a studio and you see robotic units. That's pretty common. It's pretty common. And then you'll have one person that operates all of them. But you've got studio camera operators. Who else is going to work in here? Who else? Yeah, you're going to have a boss in here. Who's the boss? Does anybody? You need to buy your textbook. No. Floor director. Bingo. Floor director. The floor director is the boss in the studio. The floor director is the eyes, ears, and mouth of the director in the studio. The floor director tells you to jump, you say how high. The floor director outranks everybody in the studio, including the talent. Make sense? They're in charge of studio safety, but their primary job is to communicate with and deal with the talent. They're the ones that are queuing, C-U, C-U-E, Q, queuing the talent. You're on. Telling them what camera to look at, when to look at it, when to start talking, when to stop talking. The very best floor directors have been grips and gaffers and camera operators, and therefore the very best floor directors can help. You know, maybe one of the camera operators has to do a really crazy move, a very long move or something like that. Well, you know, the floor director can help. Now, are we going to put microphones on anybody? Yeah, we're going to need some audio in here. We're going to need some audio in here. So, you're going to have an A2, sometimes an A2 audio assistant. That person is responsible for hooking up the microphones. The A2 is responsible for hooking up the microphones. Sometimes if you don't have an A2, the audio operator from the control room before the show comes in, hooks up the mics during the show, is in the control room operating the audio board. Does that make sense? But in larger facilities, don't be surprised, you'll have an A2 that's in the studio dealing with what's going on in here. All right? Who else are you going to see in the studio? Here they come. It's almost showtime. The host. The talent. The talent. Yeah, the host, the hostess, the anchors, the meteorologist, the sports guy, the sports gal, Scott Haney, coming in to do the weather. Here they come. But they are simply talent. And that's how you will treat them. Yes?
So like someone on the Conan show, for example, like the director outranks him even though it's his show? Or would he do both?
Say again?
Like if you're on like the Conan show,
Conan O'Brien, okay.
Is the host. He's
During the show, the floor director outranks Conan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If I was the floor director for Oprah and I said, Oprah, please move your chair 6 inches to the left, she would do it.
But after the show?
After the show, hey man, she's the executive producer. During the show, you do what I tell you to do. That's how it's supposed to work. It's not adversarial.
Yeah.
You know, it's not. If I'm telling you to do something, there's a reason, all right? It's sort of like, remember my safety thing? If I tell you to do something, you better just do it, and we can argue about it later. Yeah. So if I tell Conan, hey, bud, need you to just kind of do it, and that's how it works. All right, so your talent, but they're just talent. Treat them like talent. Get them in here, let them do their job, and then get them out. I don't want them in my studio any longer than they have to be. Hi, Madonna. It's great to meet you. Get in here, sit her down, let her do her thing, get her out. Taylor Swift, same deal. Don't ask for autographs. Get her in, sit her down, get her out of your studio. Very nice to meet you. Leave. Make sense? All right, don't get all starry-eyed. Okay, they're just talent. They're just talent. They have a job, you have a job, right? Do your job. Who else might you run into in a studio? You might run into a makeup artist. You might run into a wardrobe person or someone that does hair. You might run into one of the producers. You might run into the director. But the primary job of the producer and the director is not in the studio, it's actually in the control room. All right? They'll be in there behind the glass. Does that make sense? So we've talked about all the people who you're going to run into in here. Those are the most common, sort of the lowest common denominator group of staff. Yeah?
Does the director control the actual shots that are happening, or is that up to the floor director and the camera operators?
The director is telling the camera operators through the headsets what he or she wants. Okay? And so everybody's on an intercom. And what they can hear through the intercom system is the director. All right? And the director's using a language called the command cue language. We'll talk more about this next time. To talk to everybody at the same time. But the director is the boss of everybody. The floor director is the boss of the studio. Does that make sense? Because the director's where? The director's in there, and the floor director's out here. Other questions? Yeah?
So like with TV, they don't have like a DP, a director of photography?
A director of photography is a term that you would see more commonly used with a film shoot. A film shoot, not television. Studio TV.
Does A2 set up the comm system?
The intercoms? No, everybody sort of sets up their own intercoms. It's really kind of built in. The camera operators have built-in intercoms. The floor director's intercom is a pretty simple unit. I'll show you that later on. It's just a headset, a belt pack, and a cable. So it's really pretty easy.
And the talent?
The talent, that little funny thing in their ear, that's a different thing. But the audio person would help them get that set up. That's called IFB. IFB is interrupt foldback, also known as interrupt feedback. And what they are hearing in that thing is audio program. And so, in a way, as they're talking, they're hearing themselves live. But the interrupt feature is the important part of that. The producer can actually hit a button and talk to them straight into their ear and say, hey, we've got breaking news out of Hartford. There was the governor was shot. We understand that we have breaking news out of Hartford. The governor was just shot. That's how they do it. That's the interrupt feature. Imagine what that's like, trying to speak to a camera while someone's talking in your ear. How many of you remember September 11th? You were pretty young, but do you remember that? Yeah, there was no script. There was nothing in the teleprompter. The producers were feeding them everything through the IFB. We understand there's another airplane that just went into the Pentagon. We understand that there... Does that make sense? That's how that was done, which is intense. Can you imagine being on air to the entire United States with no script? Yeah, crazy. All right, other questions about stuff or people? All right, get the book. The midterm is an iceberg. You are the Titanic and you're gonna hit it. Yeah? Get the book. Get the book and start reading. I'll see you guys in 1 week because Monday's a holiday. See ya.